Well, hello and an extremely warm welcome to my channel. I'm Louise Savidge of Louise Savidge Muses. Welcome back if you're a returning viewer, and an equally warm welcome if you are viewing my channel for the very first time. So I suspect it's probably partway through January, quite a way into January now, and this is a bit belated. But I did want to wrap up on the books that I read in December in 2024. Otherwise they wouldn't get a mention, and that seemed really unfair. So without further ado, I will dive in. It's weird actually, because it seems like quite a slim handful. I always think I'm going to read loads in December, and then it doesn't happen. I think probably because, you know, there's a lot going on socially, I don't know. And these are all relatively short reads as well. But anyway, none the worse for that. So the very first book I picked up in December, I was going to say November then, was Rose Tremain's Lily. It's taken me a while to get to this. I absolutely love Rose Tremain's writing, and right from the minute that I picked this book up, you just feel like you're in incredibly safe hands. So Lily is a young girl growing up in, she's a quorum girl, which means that she was left as a foundling. She was abandoned as a baby on the doorsteps of this foundling hospital. And for the first 6 years of her life, she's sent off to live in rural Essex or Suffolk or somewhere in the southeast of the country. And so she grows up in this rural family and has a relatively happy existence. But then at the age of 6, she has to return, as all the quorum girls do, back to the foundling hospital, where she is treated pretty appallingly. So it's a little bit kind of, it's got Oliver Twist vibes in many ways. And Rose Tremain is exploring, I think, the plight of the rural poor in the 19th century, but also obviously, you know, the lack of power that these young women had, given, you know, what had happened to them. And Lily becomes a wig maker, and I really enjoyed reading those descriptions of the wigs and so on. I thought that was really clever, and it's a world that I knew nothing about. So I you know, I enjoy sort of crafts and stuff like that. So I thought that was interesting. It had a bit of Tracy Chevalier about it, that whole thing about handicrafts. So I loved that. And I also enjoyed, there is a kind of sort of mystery. We know that Lily has done something in her past. We're learning the story. We're kind of looking back through time. So I think Lily is maybe in her early 30s, late 20s when you know, when the novel is, when the story's being told. So we know that something has happened, that Lily has done something she should not have done. And there's a character of a sort of young detective, young policeman in the novel, who I really enjoyed as well, and he's very conflicted. Yeah, I thought this was a very sort of gentle, entertaining, just very neat piece of historical fiction is how I would describe it. And I also read some Dorothy Parker. I really, you know, she was an American writer writing in the sort of 1950s, I guess. And she's just, her stories have, you know, a not very subtle feminist overtone, but also sometimes now, because of when she was writing, can seem a little bit dated. But I just love her kind of wryness and the way that she exposes particularly the hypocrisy of men. And she doesn't, you know, there are no holes barred in these tales. There was one in particular that I love. I think it was called Mr. Durant or Mr. Durant, about a man who is travelling into work. He sees this woman on a trolley bus. He's eyeing her up. It becomes apparent that he's had an affair at work, and the woman he's had an affair with, he's sent off to have an abortion. I mean, it's all very disturbing. But what's brilliant is that he comes home, and he's got his wife and his 2 young children, a male and female child. So it's like the archetypal American family. And they have found this dog, and, you know, daddy, can we keep this dog? It's a stray. And he sort of goes along with it until he realizes that the dog is female. And, well, we can't have a female dog. Females get up to all sorts of trouble. And it's just, I just think it's an absolute gem of a story, the way that it really highlights, you know, his absolute and utter shameless hypocrisy, and the fact that he absolutely can't see it. So yeah, this was a collection that I really loved, and I do like these editions as well, these cloth bound books, the Penguin Classic cloth bound books. And then I read, and this was a prompt read. You had to read a book with your name in the title or something like that. So obviously I am Miss Savidge. This is Miss Savidge Moves Her House. And this was my novel of the month for December. I've really, really enjoyed it. Actually, I say novel. It's not a novel. It was my book of the month, because this is the true story of May Savidge, who moved her entire house from, well, she moved it 100 miles. And this was because the house was being threatened with demolition. It was an extraordinary historical building, only small, and she spent decades of her life dismantling this house, campaigning for it to be moved, well, campaigning to save it, and then when she realised she couldn't save it, moving it. It's told through the eyes of her nephew's wife, who obviously knew her intimately and ultimately inherited the house along with her nephew. Auntie May, as she's referred to in the book, was a hoarder. So we've got descriptions of, you know, her niece going through the house when she inherits it and all the stuff that's in there, and the way that the nephew and niece continue to try and rebuild the building, because at the point at which Auntie May dies, the building is still not finished. It's been moved, it's been re-erected, the roof's on, but there are window panes missing and all sorts. And this is just a wonderful, true story of human determination, absolute, sheer and utter determination. And Auntie May is a much, much, much more interesting character than you might think. You know, she's done extraordinary things in her past, and the way that she treats her neighbours, the way that she is sometimes treated by the people in the village where she moves to ultimately, really very, very interesting human story. I really enjoyed it. And then I picked up Signet by Butler. I hadn't heard of this author. This was, on the front it says, a bright new voice in literature, and that is a quote from Bernardine Evaristo. So, you know, she comes with a good, what's the word? High praise indeed, I would say, on the front of this book. And this is a really unusual novel, if you want to read something a little bit different. So it's set on an island called Swan Island, which is off the east coast of America. And it's about a young girl whose parents are drug addicts, and she's kind of been abandoned, and she's just about to turn 18, I think, if I remember rightly, and she's being put up on this island by her godmother, who's sort of taken pity on her. But the point about this island is it's a retirement island. It's an island that is completely, everybody who lives there has to be over a certain age and has to be retired, so she shouldn't really be there. And it's just a really interesting exploration of her psychology, growing up with these parents who are drug addicts. She's kind of waiting for them to turn up for her to celebrate her birthday, and the way that the island's community react to her, and of course, you know, they're all individuals, so they react differently. One member of the community is particularly hostile towards her presence on the island. The sea is a really important character in this book. It's sort of this metaphor for destruction, because it's gradually eating away at this island, and it sort of kind of captures her sort of restlessness and so on. She has this boyfriend, in inverted commas, who visits once, I think it's once a week maybe, and seems to sort of take advantage of her. But she's also doing this really interesting job. She's employed by one of the elderly ladies who live on the island, who's incredibly wealthy. and she's paying her to re-digitalize old photographs and old video footage of her family. So she's going back and kind of rewriting the past for this old woman. So for example, there might be a photograph which shows this old lady's daughter looking rather plump. So the young woman will be tasked with shrinking her so she doesn't look plump on the photograph. So there's actually, this novel has really lingered with me, because yeah, there's something just a bit quirky at it. I love the way it looks at old age. I love the way it looks at relationships between older and younger people, which you don't see that often in books. Yeah, and obviously Signet, the title, you know, she is the young swan. Potentially she will end up like these other people, maybe she won't. But yeah, no, I really recommend this. I really enjoyed it. Very unusual book. And then to finish off my reading prompts, I had to read a book to do the extra, super duper extra additional prompt. I had to read a book with a 2 or 4 in the title. So I bought Thomas Hardy's 2 on a Tower specifically for the prompt, because I didn't have anything on my shelf, so I treated myself. I loved Thomas Hardy as a young girl. I really devoured a lot of his novels, and I thought I'd read more of them than I actually have. There are still quite a few that I haven't read. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this. It's a slimmer novel than many of his others. And I just loved the premise of it. It's about, it starts with a woman pulling up in a field in a carriage and saying, "Can we go up to that thing now, sir?" Or whatever. No, she wouldn't call the driver sir, would she? She's a lady. And he's like, no, ma'am, you know, we can't go up until the winter. And then the scene's repeated. And it transpires that she is the wife of somebody in the landed gentry. He's gone off tiger hunting, lion hunting in Africa, and hasn't been seen of for 4 or 5 years. So she doesn't really even know whether she's a widow or not. People suspect she probably is, because he's not been heard of. So she's in this kind of really sort of limbo state for a Victorian woman, very vulnerable. And there's a tower on their property that she's never been to. So she that's why she was in the carriage. She wanted to go and visit this tower. So spring comes and she goes and visits the tower, and it's not quite as overgrown as she's expecting. She opens the door, goes up into the tower, and there's a beautiful, stunning young man at the top, and he is actually the son of the local vicar, and he has set up this these astronomical devices, telescope, on top of the tower, and they start stargazing together. And it's sort of typical Thomas Hardy, you know, we're thrown here, there and everywhere in terms of lots of twists and turns. The woman is incredibly vulnerable, a bit too vulnerable for my liking. She's not quite savvy enough, but there we are. It's probably a sign of her times. But I just enjoyed it as a really entertaining read, and I liked. It's a bit, you know, he's sort of taken imagery from John Donne, really, and he's looking at the whole, their stargazing is a metaphor for their relationship and their love for each other. And that's sort of apparent throughout the novel, and I really enjoyed looking at that sort of, learning about how astronomy was developing at the time. There's a lot about it in this book. He must have done quite a lot of research, but also the whole story around the missing husband is really quite good and quite enticing, and she has a brother who turns up who also is quite an interesting character. And again, you know, like Hardy, you've got the set scenes with the men who work the land. You know, they're kind of like these sort of almost comic characters with their Dorset dialect. They always remind me of the mechanicals in A Midsummer Night's Dream, you know, Bottom and all his sort of compatriots. So yeah, there was a lot to love about this. I really did enjoy reading another Hardy novel. And goals for 2025. And then I mentioned last month about reading poetry, and I realised I don't really talk about the poetry I read. So this month I read Wendy Cope's Anecdotal Evidence, I really enjoy Wendy Cope's poetry. I find it wry, witty, sometimes quite profound, always entertaining. There are certain aspects of it that irritate me slightly, and I've been to see her perform, and she's quite a character. But yeah, I've just got a real affection for her poems. And she was, in her younger life, she was a primary school teacher. And there are lots of poems in here that are kind of reflecting on the process of aging. She writes about quite a few of her friends who've died, presumably during the course of writing this anthology. But there's a whole section, it was absolutely perfect for reading at Christmas time, because there's a whole section of poems here that are kind of reflecting on her experiences of teaching, particularly around Christmas time. So it was a wonderful collection to read at that time of year. And I've had a few requests from you lovely people to read a poem. So I'm going to read one. I actually do really enjoy reading poetry. And so I'm going to read you a poem from this collection, which won't be seasonal now because it will be the middle of January, but it was very seasonal when I read it at Christmas, and it's called Little Donkey. Little Donkey, the children's favourite. We had to sing it in the Christmas concert every year, plodding along with me at the piano and a child going clip-clop with coconut shells or woodblock, a coveted job. It wasn't my favourite. After I left teaching, I forgot about it for more than 10 years. Until one day, near Christmas, in a busy high street, a Salvation Army band began to play it. I stood still with tears in my eyes. Little Donkey. All those children who loved it so much. All those hands in the air, begging to be chosen to make the sound of his hooves. And that poem tugs at me. It makes me feel really emotional because it's about the passage of time and how I think it really resonates with me because of the age that I am now. This is my 60th year. And you look back on things that you perhaps took for granted when you were younger, that you maybe should have appreciated more at the time. And I think that poem captures that feeling of nostalgia and poignancy absolutely beautifully. So that's Little Donkey from Wendy Cope's Anecdotal Evidence. And on that note, I have no more to say because that was my December reading. And yeah, there we go. I wonder what this year will bring. I wonder what January's reading wrap-up will be like. Maybe quite slim because I'm away for 3 weeks in January. But we shall see. Take care, everybody.